In this video, I'd like to talk about the use of Power Pivot. Now, in other lectures as part of my class, I've talked about the data model, which is this capability that exists within Excel to, through this connections area, to enable us to create tables on different worksheets in a workbook and then to relate those different worksheets together so that they can be used in a pivot table. However, what if you want to get data that's not in this workbook? What if you have data that's stored, say for instance, in a database? So you might be a business analyst that wants to analyze data that's at your firm and it's in a database that they have, and you're going to analyze it using a pivot table that is embedded in Excel. The way that you can do that is by using the Power Pivot tool. And even though it's called Power Pivot, really it's going to be a separate application that allows you to access the data that's in a bunch of different places, create the connections between the different sets of data that you have if they share a column that's in common, an ID column, and then you actually go back into Excel to do pivot table work. And so just as a refresher here, this is just a random image of a database schema that I pulled off of the web. And even though this one's a little complicated, I just wanted to highlight that if I were to look at something, for example, like this review table here, these are the column names that exist in here. If I viewed the actual data for this, it would have a column for each one of these items listed here and then real information listed underneath it. And then, so if this is a table of reviews, it makes sense that a review is created by a person, and so I can follow a line from over here. It says creator ID. That line kind of goes over to this thing here, which is connected to user. So there's a table of users and a table of reviewers, and I can see the user ID in the reviewer table. There's some other stuff here within the review table for each record of a review. There's also a phase ID that it references, so I can go out to the phase table and see all the different types of phases there are, or all of the templates. Anyway, I don't really know what all these things are. I just pulled this thing off of the web, but that's how things often work, is that there is a hub and then there's spokes out to a whole bunch of different tables, and some table that's somewhat centralized connects to a bunch of others. All right, so let's kind of do a similar type of thing with using Power Pivot, where we're able to link together a bunch of sources of data so that all of them can be used as part of a pivot table. So first, I'm going to create a table here and give it a name. In this case, I'll call it stores. And then I'm going to either go to data and click on this Power Pivot window icon, or under the Power Pivot tab, if it's enabled, you can also click manage. Oops. Well, that works just fine. However, I want to just from this page click on add to data model. So I will click that, and by so doing, it opens up this window which looks like a separate application that was launched from Excel, and in the bottom it says what data I'm looking at. In this case it says I'm looking at the stores data, and I need some more data. It happens in this case I have data that's in a separate text file, so I want to import that and link it to this other set of data. So I'm going to click on get external data from other sources, and I've got all kinds of databases I could connect to if that was my method of doing things. But I'm going to go down to the very bottom and click text file, and I'm going to look for the text file which has the transactional data related to stores, and maybe I'll just call this store sales. Now it's not formatted correctly at present, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this file to see what it is. It's actually a tab delimited file, so I will select tab delimited, and now it creates the columns for me nicely. with the correct header names. So I click Finish, and it imports over 1,000 rows. So now Power Pivot has two different sets of data that are there. Again, since in a real world database there might be lots of different tables that I care about, and they might even be in completely different databases. I could then import many different sets of data that I will then connect to one another. So how do I, now at this point I know there's a store ID column here as it relates to each record of a sale that's been made, and then over here for the different locations of the stores there's again a store ID, but I need a way to tie these things together. So the way I do that is I can go up here to Diagram View, or down here, and I click on Diagram View, and I'm going to link these together. Once I've done that, I can now click on Pivot Table, and it will make both of these sets of data available for use within the pivot table. However, before I do that, let me go back to the data view and demonstrate one additional thing. In the real world, it's not enough many cases to just simply import the data. You might want to do some things to manipulate the data so that it's more useful in pivot tables. For example, wouldn't it be nice if you could see some trend or organize your sales based on month or day or year? Well, you have a date, but you don't have something as nicely defined as a single year here. However, there's a whole bunch of functions that are available that are specific to Power Pivot only, and you can see those in one way of doing that is just by clicking in this empty column and typing equals, and I'm going to just start typing year because I want to pull out the year, and there we go. There's this function, and I'm going to, it says you give it a date, so I click on this particular date and I hit return, and it's going to take a second to process, and then it's going to calculate the year for each of these. Now I could also do equals month, and that's yet another thing that's available. Oops. Well, something a little strange is going on here. Maybe I don't want my month after all this time. Alright, it took it a second, but so it gives us a month from 1 to 12. Alright, so now I'm ready to click on Pivot Table, having created some new columns of data. And by the way, I believe these are called DAX functions that I just worked with, and there are entire books on this topic that you can use if you are importing data into Power Pivot to then be used in pivot tables, and you want to learn more about how to manipulate those. Oh, although one other thing that would be nice is if I gave this some type of descriptive name, such as years or months. Alright, so having done that, I will now click on Pivot Table. I will create a new worksheet, and now I see over here the two sets of data from Power Pivot. So first off, I'll go to my store sales data, and I will pull in the revenue and get a summary of that, and I can break that up by product. I could also break that up by years so I can see how I'm doing over time. So it was nice that I was able to do that. Maybe within a given year I might be interested in, well, actually for each year I could also try and see what the patterns are on average going from January through December. I'm going to get rid of those things for now and get rid of, well, I'm going to get rid of product for a moment, and the location of where a sale is made for a given record is listed in the store's information, so I will pull that down and put it here. And so now I'm able to roll up or summarize the total number of sales that happened in stores in Illinois or in Indiana or in Iowa. And using the power of pivot tables, I could look at that, for example, over time and see how things are doing. There are probably going to be a lot of things that you can come up with and imagine that you can do, but as it relates to using pivot tables and all the functionality that's there, it really is what kind of pivot table you make and what data you use is based on what business problem you're being faced with. But the important thing to take away from this is that your data is not always located in data that's in a single worksheet or even across several worksheets within a given workbook. You might have to go into a database. And the nice thing about Power Pivot is that you can access millions of records that are in other data sources, and they will be quickly summarized by using this tool.